The blood on Georgia Ashford's hands had dried hours ago, but she could still feel its weight as she stumbled through the dusty streets of Bentonville, Arkansas, the July sun beating down mercilessly on her neck. She had killed a man that morning, shot him straight through the heart with her father's old revolver when he tried to force himself on her in the boarding house where she cleaned rooms for pennies. And now, there was nowhere in this town or any other that would shelter her from the rope that surely awaited if she stayed. The year was 1874, and women who defended themselves rarely found mercy in courtrooms run by men who believed their gender should accept whatever violence came their way with lowered eyes and silence. Georgia's dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, the pins lost somewhere between the boarding house and the sheriff's office she had deliberately avoided on her flight through town. Her dress, once a respectable gray cotton, bore dark stains she tried not to look at. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and alone in a world that had little patience for women in such circumstances, even before they became killers. The desert stretched beyond Bentonville like an ocean of sand and scrub brush, promising either death or disappearance, and at this moment, Georgia found she did not particularly care which one claimed her. She had no horse, no water, no supplies of any kind. She had only the clothes on her back, the empty revolver shoved into her skirt pocket, and the desperate need to be anywhere but here when they found Thomas Garrett's body cooling on the boarding house floor. The other girls who worked there knew what he was, what he had tried to do to half of them over the months he had stayed there, but knowing and testifying were two different things entirely. Georgia had no illusions about which side they would choose when their own livelihoods hung in the balance. The edge of town approached faster than she expected, or perhaps she had been walking faster than she realized. Her breath came hard and sharp in her chest, panic making her heart race even as her mind tried to quiet into the cold calm she would need to survive. The desert waited, shimmering in the heat, and Georgia walked toward it the way a woman might walk toward the gallows, with her head high and her fear locked somewhere deep where it could not touch her face. "Madam, I would not recommend that particular direction." The voice came from her left, low and steady, with the kind of authority that made Georgia stop despite every instinct screaming at her to keep moving. She turned slowly, her hand moving instinctively toward the revolver in her pocket before she remembered it held no more bullets. The man stood beside a black horse, one hand resting easy on the saddle while he watched her with eyes the color of summer sky. He was tall, built lean and strong the way men got when they spent their lives working under the sun, and he wore the practical clothing of a cowboy. Dark trousers, a worn shirt, a hat that had seen better days tilted back on his head to reveal brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. He could not have been much older than she was, perhaps 25 or 26, and there was something in his face that suggested he had seen his share of trouble and survived it. "I will go where I please," Georgia said, her voice coming out harder than she intended. "Thank you for your concern." She turned back toward the desert, but his voice stopped her again. "That desert will kill you before nightfall. No water, no shade, and the heat this time of year does not forgive mistakes." He paused, and she heard him take a step closer. "Whatever you are running from, dying of thirst is a hard way to escape it. You do not know what I am running from." Georgia kept her back to him, afraid that if she looked at him again she might break, might tell him everything and beg for help she had no right to ask for. "No, madam, I do not. But I know desperation when I see it, and I know that desert." His voice softened slightly, losing some of its hard edge. "Will you let me guide you home?" The question hit Georgia like a physical blow. Home, as if such a place existed for her anymore. As if she had not destroyed any chance of home the moment she pulled that trigger. justified or not. She turned to face him fully now, and saw that he was watching her with genuine concern in those blue eyes, not the calculating interest men usually showed when they looked at her. "I have no home," she said simply, "and guiding me back to town would be the same as putting a rope around my neck yourself." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of understanding that told Georgia he had experience with running, with the kind of trouble that made staying put more dangerous than moving on. He glanced back toward town, then at the desert, then at her again, and she watched him make some kind of decision behind those thoughtful eyes. "My name is Zachary Quinn," he said. "I have a ranch about 20 miles northeast of here, up in the hills where the springs run cool even in summer. I am not offering to take you back to town. I am offering to take you somewhere safe until you can figure out what comes next." Georgia stared at him, searching for the trap in his words, the hidden price men always seem to expect women to pay for their help. But his face remained open, honest, his posture relaxed despite the tension she knew must be radiating from her like heat from stones. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You do not know me. You do not know what I have done." Zachary was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the horizon before returning to her. "My sister was 20 when a man hurt her badly enough that she never recovered. She died 6 months later, just gave up living because the shame was more than she could carry." His voice remained steady, but Georgia heard the old pain underneath it. "I was too young then to help her, too ignorant to understand what she needed. But I am not too young anymore, and when I see a woman walking into the desert like it is her only option, I figure offering help is the least I can do." The sincerity in his words struck something deep in George's chest. Some place she had thought went numb the moment Thomas Garrett's hands closed around her throat that morning. She had fought him off, grabbed the gun from where she kept it hidden in the cleaning supplies, and fired before he could hurt her the way he had clearly intended to. The look of surprise on his face would haunt her forever, she knew, but not as much as the alternative would have. "I killed a man today," Georgia heard herself say, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "He tried to force himself on me, and I shot him. The law will not care why I did it. They will only care that I did." Zachary's expression did not change, did not fill with the horror or disgust she expected. He simply nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. "Then you definitely should not walk into that desert, and you definitely need somewhere safe to go." He gathered his horse's reins and took a step toward her, moving slowly like he was approaching a spooked animal. "I give you my word, miss, that I mean you no harm. I can get you to my ranch, get you water and food, and we can figure out the rest from there. But we need to go now, before whoever is looking for you starts searching outside town." Georgia knew she had no good options. She could refuse his help and die in the desert, almost certainly. She could go back to town and hang, almost certainly. Or she could trust this stranger with the kind eyes and the patient voice, and hope that her instincts about him were right. Her instincts had saved her life this morning when Thomas Garrett had cornered her. Perhaps they would save her again now. "My name is Georgia Ashford," she said quietly. "And I accept your help, Mr. Quinn." Relief flickered across his face, brief but genuine. "Call me Zachary, please. Mr. Quinn was my father, and he was not a man worth remembering." He led the horse closer and held out his hand to help her mount. "Can you ride?" "Not well, but well enough." Georgia took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip as he helped her up into the saddle. He swung up behind her a moment later, his arms coming around her to grasp the reins, and she stiffened instinctively at the closeness. "I am sorry," he said quietly, his breath stirring her hair. "But we will make better time with both of us on horseback, and time matters right now. I will not hurt you, Georgia. You have my word on that." She believed him, which surprised her. After this morning, she had not expected to trust any man again for a very long time. But something about Zachary felt different, felt safe in a way she desperately needed right now. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and felt him relax slightly behind her as he urged the horse into an easy trot that would eat up the miles without exhausting the animal. They rode in silence for the first hour, leaving Bentonville behind as they headed northeast into the hills that rose beyond the flat farmland surrounding the town. The landscape changed gradually, the open plains giving way to rocky outcroppings and sparse pine trees that provided blessed shade from the relentless sun. Georgia felt her panic slowly subsiding, replaced by exhaustion so profound she could barely hold herself upright in the saddle. Zachary must have felt her sagging because his arm tightened around her waist, steadying her. "Not much farther," he said. "Another hour and we will be home. You can rest then. Home." He kept using that word, as if he truly meant to share his home with a stranger, a killer, someone who could bring nothing but trouble to his doorstep. Georgia wanted to ask him why, wanted to understand what motivated this kindness, but she was too tired to form the words. Instead, she let herself lean back slightly against his solid warmth, and tried not to think about the body she had left behind or the life she had just lost forever. The sun had moved considerably across the sky by the time they crested a final hill, and Georgia saw the ranch spread out in the valley below. It was modest but well-maintained, a sturdy wooden house with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides, a barn that looked recently painted, corrals holding a dozen horses, and fields where cattle grazed peacefully. A stream ran through the property, glinting silver in the afternoon light, and Georgia felt something in her chest loosen at the sight of all that water, proof that this place was nothing like the desert she had been walking toward. "It is not much," Zachary said, and she heard something like pride in his voice despite the modest words. "But it is mine, paid for with 5 years of hard work after I left my father's place. The land is good here, plenty of water and grass for the cattle, and far enough from town that people mostly leave me alone." "It is beautiful," Georgia said honestly. After the dusty boarding house, where she had spent the last year scrubbing floors and changing sheets, this place looked like paradise. They rode down into the valley, and Georgia noticed details she had missed at first. The vegetable garden beside the house, neat rows of plants that spoke of careful tending, the chickens scratching in a fenced yard, the washing hanging on a line, flapping gently in the breeze. Someone took good care of this place, kept it running smoothly, and she wondered if Zachary had a wife waiting inside the house, what that wife would think of him bringing home a strange woman with blood on her dress. As if reading her thoughts, Zachary said, "I live alone. My younger brother Thomas stays here sometimes, helps with the cattle when I need extra hands, but he is up in Missouri right now visiting our mother's family. So it is just me, and now you, I suppose." Relief and anxiety warred in Georgia's chest. Relief that there would be no wife to judge her, no other woman to navigate around. Anxiety that she would be alone here with a man she did not know, dependent on his goodwill and his word that he meant her no harm. But then, she had already made her choice when she accepted his help. There was no going back now. Zachary reined the horse to a stop near the house and dismounted smoothly, then reached up to help Georgia down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, stiff from the long ride and shaky from everything that had happened. His hands steadied her, holding her upright until she found her balance. "Come inside," he said gently. "Let me get you some water, something to eat. Then you can wash up and rest." Georgia let him guide her up the porch steps and through the front door into a surprisingly comfortable interior. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a wood stove in one corner, a sturdy table with chairs, and a worn but clean sofa facing a stone fireplace. Doorways led to what she assumed were bedrooms, and everything was neat and orderly in a way that suggested Zachary was a man who took care of his possessions. He settled her into a chair at the table and moved to the water pump by the sink, filling a tin cup that he brought to her, along with a plate of bread and cold meat from the larder. Georgia drank deeply, the water tasting better than anything she could remember, and forced herself to eat slowly despite her hunger. Zachary busied himself with stabling the horse, giving her space and time to collect herself, and she was grateful for his understanding. When he returned, he carried a basin of clean water and some cloths. "There is a room at the back where you can wash up properly," he said. "I will heat water for a bath if you like, though it will take a little time. In the meantime, this should help." Georgia looked down at her hands, at the dried blood still visible in the creases of her palms, and felt her stomach turn. "Thank you," she whispered. "A bath would be welcome whenever you have time. I will start heating water now. You go ahead and use the back room, take as long as you need. There are some clothes in the trunk there that might fit you, things that belonged to my mother before she passed. You are welcome to them." The casual generosity nearly undid her. Georgia felt tears pricking at her eyes, the first tears she had allowed herself since this morning's horror, and she blinked them back fiercely. She would not break down now, not when this stranger had shown her more kindness in a few hours than most people had shown her in years. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and took the basin and cloths to the room he had indicated. The back room was small but private, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and the trunk Zachary had mentioned. Georgia stripped out of her ruined dress, balling it up and shoving it into a corner where she would not have to look at it. She washed methodically, scrubbing away the blood and the sweat and the feeling of Thomas Garrett's hands on her throat. The water in the basin turned pink, then red, and she had to change it twice before she felt even remotely clean. In the trunk, she found several dresses that were slightly old-fashioned but well-made, along with undergarments and a nightgown that looked barely worn. She chose a simple blue calico dress that fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the waist. Zachary's mother must have been a larger woman, or perhaps these were dresses from her younger years. Either way, Georgia was grateful to be wearing clean clothes that did not carry the memory of violence. When she emerged from the back room, Zachary had several pots of water heating on the stove, and he was hauling a large tin tub into the room from somewhere outside. He set it near the stove and began filling it with hot water, adding cold from the pump until the temperature was comfortable. "It is not fancy," he said, gesturing at the tub, "but it is hot and clean, and there is soap on the shelf there. Take your time. I will be outside tending the animals if you need anything." He left before Georgia could thank him, closing the door behind him to give her privacy, and she stood staring at the steaming water for a long moment before stripping again and climbing into the tub. The heat soaked into her muscles, easing tensions she had not realized she was holding, and she dunked her head under to wet her hair. The soap smelled of lye and lavender, harsh and floral at the same time, and she scrubbed her hair and skin until both felt raw and new. By the time she climbed out of the tub and dried herself with the towel Zachary had left, the sun was setting outside the windows, painting the room in shades of gold and amber. Georgia dressed again in the blue calico, braided her wet hair down her back, and ventured into the main room to find Zachary stirring something that smelled wonderful in a pot on the stove. "I hope you like stew," he said without turning around. It is about the only thing I cook well, so you will be eating a lot of it if you stay here long. It smells amazing, Georgia said honestly, her stomach growling despite the bread and meat she had eaten earlier. Thank you for all of this, Zachary. For the clothes, the bath, the food. For not leaving me to die in the desert. I do not know how I will ever repay you. He turned to look at her then, his blue eyes serious in the lamplight. You do not owe me anything, Georgia. I did what any decent person should do when they see someone in trouble. He paused, studying her face. But I think we need to talk about what happens next, about whether anyone will come looking for you and what we will do if they do. Georgia sank into a chair at the table, the brief peace of the bath evaporating as reality reasserted itself. I do not know, she admitted. Thomas Garrett was staying at the boarding house, but I do not think he had family in Bentonville. He was passing through on his way to Texas, at least that is what he told us. But the sheriff will still investigate, still look for whoever killed him. Did anyone see you leave? Zachary ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table, settling across from her. I do not think so. It was early morning and most people were still asleep. I went out the back way, through the alley. Georgia picked up her spoon but did not eat yet. The other girls at the boarding house knew he was bothering me, knew he tried things with several of us. But I do not know if they will tell the sheriff that, or if they will be too afraid of losing their jobs. Zachary was quiet for a moment, eating his stew thoughtfully. Bentonville is a small town, but it is not that small. If this Garrett fellow was just passing through, and if no one saw you leave, the sheriff might look around for a day or two and then move on. Drifters get killed all the time in towns like that, usually over gambling debts or disagreements in saloons. Without witnesses, he has nothing to go on. You think I might be safe? Georgia heard the desperate hope in her own voice and hated herself for it. I think you might be if you stay out of sight for a while. Stay here at the ranch. Let things settle down in town. I go into Bentonville once a month for supplies and I can listen for any news, any talk about what happened. If it seems like they are actively looking for you, we will figure something out. But my guess is that nobody will care too much about one dead drifter, especially if he was the kind of man who made trouble for women. It was not a guarantee, but it was more than Georgia had hoped for when she walked toward the desert this morning. She ate her stew slowly, savoring the rich flavor and the warmth that spread through her belly. Zachary had made fresh bread to go with it, crusty on the outside and soft inside, and she ate 2 slices before her stomach finally felt full. They cleaned up the dishes together, working in companionable silence, and then Zachary showed her to the small bedroom where she would sleep. It was the room with the trunk, the one she had used to change earlier, and he had made up the bed with fresh sheets and a light blanket. I am right next door if you need anything, he said from the doorway. And Georgia, you are safe here. Whatever happened in town, whatever you had to do to protect yourself, you are safe now. Try to rest. Georgia nodded, her throat too tight to speak, and watched him pull the door closed behind him. She stood in the middle of the small room for a long time, listening to the sounds of him moving around in the other room, preparing for bed. Eventually, she heard his door close, heard the creak of bed springs as he settled in, and the house fell quiet except for the usual nighttime sounds of the countryside. She climbed into bed still wearing the blue calico dress, too afraid to be vulnerable in just a nightgown, even though Zachary had given her no reason to fear him. The sheets smelled of sun and soap, clean and fresh, and the mattress was more comfortable than any she had slept on in years. Despite everything, despite the horror of the morning and the uncertainty of the future, Georgia felt her eyes growing heavy. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that Zachary Quinn had saved her life today, and she had no idea how she would ever make that right. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended peace. Georgia woke each morning to find Zachary already up and working, tending to the animals or mending fences, or doing any of the 100 tasks that kept a ranch running. He always left breakfast for her, simple food like eggs and bread, with coffee warming on the stove. She ate alone, then spent the days trying to make herself useful. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, even though it was already quite clean, because she needed to feel like she was earning her keep. She weeded the vegetable garden and picked the ripe vegetables, snapping beans and pulling carrots while the sun beat down on her back. She fed the chickens and collected eggs, mended clothes she found that needed repair, and cooked dinner each evening so that Zachary would come in from his work to find food waiting. He never asked her to do any of it. In fact, he seemed almost surprised to find the house cleaner and the meals prepared, as if he had expected her to simply rest and recover. But Georgia could not bear to be idle, could not stand the feeling of being a burden when he had already done so much for her. They fell into an easy routine, eating dinner together and then sitting on the porch as the evening cooled, watching the sun set over the hills while they talked about inconsequential things. Zachary told her about the ranch, how he had found this valley and known it was where he wanted to build his life. He told her about his brother Thomas, who was 19 and restless in the way of young men who had not yet found their purpose. He told her about growing up with a father who drank too much, and a mother who tried her best to shield her children from his temper. Georgia, in turn, told him about her own childhood in a small town in Tennessee, about losing both her parents to fever when she was 17, about the series of jobs and boarding houses that had brought her eventually to Bentonville. She did not talk much about Thomas Garrett or what had happened that morning, and Zachary did not press her for details. It was enough that they both understood what had occurred and why. On the fourth day, Zachary rode into Bentonville for supplies. Georgia spent the entire day sick with anxiety, convinced that he would hear something terrible, that the sheriff had discovered her identity and was organizing a search party, that everything was about to come crashing down. But when Zachary returned that evening, his face was calm. "I listened carefully," he said as he unloaded supplies in the kitchen. "Asked a few casual questions at the general store. The man who died is barely being talked about." The sheriff investigated for about a day, decided it was probably a disagreement with another drifter who moved on, and that was that. "Nobody mentioned your name, Georgia. Nobody seems to connect you with it at all." The relief was so intense that Georgia had to sit down, her legs suddenly weak. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I stayed in town for several hours, went to the saloon for a drink, visited the feed store and the blacksmith. If there was any talk of a missing woman or a manhunt, I would have heard it. You are in the clear as far as I can tell." Georgia put her head in her hands, breathing deeply to keep from crying. She was safe. Against all odds, against everything she had feared, she was actually safe. No one was coming for her. No rope waited in her future. She could breathe again. She felt Zachary's hand rest gently on her shoulder, a brief touch of comfort before he moved away to give her space. "It is over," he said quietly. "You can stop running now." But even as relief flooded through her, Georgia realized she faced a new problem. If she was not running anymore, if she was not in immediate danger, then what was she doing here? She could not stay on Zachary's ranch forever, living off his charity, imposing on his kindness. She needed to figure out her life, decide what came next, find some way to stand on her own again. As if reading her thoughts again, Zachary said, "You are welcome to stay here as long as you need to, Georgia. I meant what I said about that. but I understand if you want to move on, start fresh somewhere else. I can take you to Fayetteville or Fort Smith, somewhere bigger than Bentonville where you can disappear into a crowd if that is what you want." Georgia looked up at him, this man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return, and felt something shift in her chest. The truth was that she did not want to move on. In the few days she had been here, she had felt more at peace than she had in years. The ranch was beautiful, the work was satisfying, and Zachary's quiet presence had become something she looked forward to each day. She enjoyed their evening conversations, the easy way they had of talking about everything and nothing. She liked watching him work, admired his competence and his strength, found herself noticing small things about him like the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled or how gentle his hands were when he handled the animals. She was falling for him, she realized with a start. Despite everything that had happened, despite her fear and her trauma, she was developing feelings for Zachary Quinn that went well beyond gratitude. "I would like to stay," she said slowly, testing the words. "If that is truly acceptable to you, I can work to earn my keep, help around the ranch. I am a hard worker and I learn quickly. I could be useful." Something bright and warm filled Zachary's expression. "You are already useful, Georgia. More than useful. This place has felt more like a home in the last few days than it has in the entire time I have lived here." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I will not lie to you. I would be glad to have you stay, very glad, but I want you to be sure that is what you want, not just what you think you owe me." "It is what I want," Georgia said, and realized it was the truth. "This is the first place I have felt safe in a very long time. The first place I have felt like I could catch my breath and just be. I do not want to give that up if I do not have to." Zachary's smile was like sunrise, slow and illuminating. "Then stay, for as long as you want. And we will figure out the details as we go." The summer weeks passed in a blur of work and growing companionship. Georgia threw herself into ranch life, learning everything Zachary would teach her. She learned to milk the cows, churn butter, preserve vegetables for the winter. She learned to recognize which herbs grew wild on the property and how to use them for cooking and medicine. She learned to ride Zachary's gentlest horse, a sweet-tempered mare named Daisy, and helped him move the cattle between pastures. Zachary, for his part, seemed to come alive with someone to share the work and the days. He talked more, laughed more, showed her parts of the property he clearly loved. The swimming hole where the stream widened and deepened, cold and clear even in the August heat. The ridge where you could see for miles in every direction. The meadow where wildflowers grew in riotous profusion. They were careful around each other at first, conscious of propriety despite living in the same house. Georgia kept to her room, Zachary to his, and they maintained a respectful distance during the day. But gradually, as trust grew and comfort increased, the distance began to close. Their hands would brush when passing tools or dishes. They would stand closer when working side by side. Their evening conversations on the porch grew longer, stretching late into the night as they talked about everything from their dreams to their fears, to their opinions on politics and religion and the nature of justice. Georgia found herself watching Zachary when he did not notice, admiring the easy strength of his body, the concentration on his face when he worked, the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her. She began to notice that he watched her too, his gaze lingering on her face when she laughed, his attention following her movements when she crossed the yard. The attraction between them grew like the summer heat, building and building until it was almost unbearable. But neither of them acted on it, both aware of the complicated circumstances that had brought them together, both afraid of ruining the fragile peace they had built. It was Georgia who finally broke first. In late August, after she had been at the ranch for nearly 2 months, they were swimming in the creek to escape the afternoon heat. Zachary had assured her it was perfectly safe, that the swimming hole was hidden from any roads or neighboring properties, and she had changed into an old cotton shift that served as a makeshift swimming costume while he stripped down to his trousers. The water was gloriously cold, refreshing after hours of working in the sun, and they splashed and dove like children, laughing at nothing and everything. At some point, Georgia surfaced from a dive to find Zachary floating nearby, watching her with an expression so tender it made her breath catch. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing. Just thinking about how glad I am that I saw you that day walking toward the desert, how different my life would be now if I had not stopped you." His voice was quiet, serious despite the playful mood of moments before. Georgia swam closer to him, close enough that she could have reached out and touched him if she dared. "I think about that too, about how close I came to dying out there and how you saved me. You gave me a whole new life, Zachary." "You have given me something too," he said. "You have given me a reason to come home at the end of the day, someone to share this place with. I did not realize how lonely I was until you were here." The honesty in his words gave Georgia courage. "I am not lonely anymore either. For the first time in years, I feel like I belong somewhere. Like I have a home." She paused, her heart pounding. "Like I have someone who cares whether I come or go." "I care," Zachary said, his voice rough. "I care more than I probably should given the circumstances, but I cannot help it, Georgia. I have tried to keep my distance, tried to remember that you are here because you needed help, not because you chose me. But the truth is that I am falling in love with you, and I do not know how to stop it." The confession hung between them, as shocking and refreshing as the cold water. Georgia stared at him, seeing her own feelings reflected in his face, and felt something break open in her chest, something warm and bright and terrifying. "I do not want you to stop it," she whispered, "because I am falling in love with you too. I have been for weeks, maybe since the first day. You are the kindest, most decent man I have ever met, and when I am with you, I feel like I can be myself, all of myself, even the parts that are scared or broken. You make me want to believe in good things again." Zachary closed the distance between them in the water, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. "You are not broken, Georgia. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and you survived something terrible. That does not make you less. It makes you more." Then he was kissing her, soft and careful at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms coming around his neck to pull him closer. The water swirled around them as they clung to each other, pouring weeks of longing and restraint into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, marry you if you will have me. But only if that is what you want, only if you are choosing me because you want to, not because you feel like you owe me." "I want to," Georgia said fiercely. "I choose you, Zachary Quinn. I choose this life, this ranch, this future we could build together. I have never been more certain of anything." His smile was radiant, joy transforming his features into something almost beautiful. "Then I am the luckiest man alive." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. "Will you marry me, Georgia Ashford? Will you be my wife and my partner and the person I build a life with?" "Yes," Georgia breathed against his lips. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They climbed out of the water eventually, shy and giddy at the same time, the world somehow brighter and more vivid than it had been before. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and that evening, Zachary produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. They toasted their engagement with tin cups on the porch, watching the stars come out one by one, and made plans for their future. They decided to wait a few months before marrying, wanting to be sure that Georgia was truly safe, that no one from her past would come looking for her. Zachary suggested they could marry in Fayetteville, far enough from Bentonville that there was no risk of anyone recognizing her, and Georgia agreed. In the meantime, they observed the proprieties as much as possible, keeping to separate bedrooms even though it grew harder with each passing day. Zachary's brother Thomas returned from Missouri in September, a tall young man with the same blue eyes as his brother, but a more restless energy. He was initially suspicious of Georgia, protective of Zachary in a way that was both sweet and frustrating. But she won him over gradually by treating him like the younger brother she had never had. She cooked his favorite foods, listened to his stories about Missouri, and taught him how to make decent coffee instead of the bitter sludge he had been inflicting on Zachary for years. When Zachary announced their engagement, Thomas's whoop of joy could probably be heard in the next county. He hugged Georgia with enthusiasm, nearly lifting her off her feet, and declared that he had never seen his brother so happy. Having Thomas, there felt right, felt like family, and Georgia realized she was building something she had never expected to have. A real home with people who loved her. They married on a crisp October day in Fayetteville, with Thomas as their witness and a friendly judge who asked no questions about Georgia's background. She wore a dress of deep green that Zachary had bought for her, simple but beautiful, and carried wildflowers Thomas had picked that morning. Zachary wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed and his face shining with happiness, and when he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Georgia felt tears streaming down her face. "I love you," she told him as the judge pronounced them married. "I will love you for the rest of my life." "And I will love you," Zachary replied, his own eyes suspiciously bright, "for the rest of my life and beyond." Their wedding night was spent in a small but respectable hotel in Fayetteville, and Georgia discovered that intimacy with a man who loved her, who treated her with gentleness and respect, bore no resemblance to the violence Thomas Garrett had tried to inflict. Zachary was patient and tender, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and by the time dawn light crept through the curtains, Georgia understood what it meant to give yourself to someone completely and have them give themselves in return. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and life settled into a new rhythm. Thomas stayed through the winter, helping with the heavy work, and by the time he left in spring to stake his own claim further west, he and Georgia had become genuine friends. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, the herd growing, the fields productive, the house gradually improving as Zachary added small luxuries. Better windows, a larger porch, a proper cellar for storage. Georgia discovered she was pregnant in late spring, nearly a year after that July day when she had walked toward the desert with death in her heart. The realization filled her with wonder and terror in equal measure. She had never allowed herself to think about children, about a future beyond simple survival, and now here she was, about to bring new life into the world. Zachary's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He held her close and cried into her hair, overwhelmed with joy and gratitude and love. He became even more protective, insisting she not do any heavy work, bringing her water and snacks throughout the day, rubbing her feet in the evening when they swelled from the heat. Georgia found his fussing both annoying and endearing, and she loved him even more for caring so much. Their son was born in January 1876, during a cold snap that froze the stream solid and dusted the hills with snow. The birth was long and difficult, attended by a midwife from a neighboring ranch who talked Georgia through the pain with calm efficiency. But when the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced and perfectly healthy, Georgia felt a rush of love so intense it was almost painful. They named him Samuel, after Zachary's grandfather, and he had his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Zachary held his son with trembling hands, tears streaming freely down his face, and Georgia knew she had never seen him happier. Thomas rode in from his new homestead to meet his nephew, bringing gifts he had carved himself. A wooden horse, a rattle, a cradle that rocked smoothly on curved runners. The years that followed were the happiest of George's life. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, learning ranch work almost before he could walk properly. A daughter arrived 2 years later, Emily, with her father's smile and her mother's stubborn determination. Then another son, Jacob, quiet and thoughtful, content to spend hours watching the world with solemn eyes. The ranch continued to thrive. Zachary's reputation for honesty and fair dealing brought business from all over the county, and they were able to expand their property, buy better breeding stock, build new outbuildings. Georgia managed the household with capable efficiency, but she also became known in the area for her skill with medicinal herbs, and neighbors often rode over to ask her advice for various ailments. She never went back to Bentonville. There was no reason to, and though the fear of discovery had faded over the years, Georgia saw no point in tempting fate. Zachary handled any business that required going to town, and Georgia was content to stay on the ranch, surrounded by the family she had built and the life she had created. Sometimes, on summer evenings, she would stand on the porch and look toward the east, toward where Bentonville lay beyond the hills, and remember that July day when she had walked toward the desert with nothing but desperation in her heart. She remembered the feel of Thomas Garrett's hands around her throat, remembered the weight of the gun in her hand, remembered the terrible finality of pulling the trigger. She remembered the blood and the fear and the certainty that her life was over. And then she remembered Zachary's voice. "Will you let me guide you home?" He had guided her home, though neither of them knew it at the time. He had given her safety when she expected death, kindness when she expected judgment, love when she expected to never trust again. He had given her a home and a family and a future she never could have imagined. On their 10th anniversary, Zachary gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts," he said, "for the story of how we came to be, I think it is worth remembering, do not you?" Georgia held the journal in her hands, running her fingers over the smooth leather, and nodded. It was worth remembering, all of it, the darkness that had brought them together and the light they had built from it. She would write it down someday, she decided. Tell the whole truth of how a woman walking toward death had been saved by a cowboy with kind eyes and a generous heart. But not yet. For now, she was content to live in the present, to watch her children play in the yard while her husband worked nearby, to feel the sun warm on her face and know that she was home, truly home, in a way she had never been before. Thomas came to visit that summer with a wife of his own, a spirited woman named Catherine who made him laugh and kept him grounded in a way he desperately needed. The two families spent a wonderful week together, the adults talking late into the night while the children played, and Georgia felt her happiness was complete. "You know," Thomas said one evening as they all sat on the porch, "I think about that day Zachary brought you home. I remember how protective I felt, how worried I was that you might hurt him somehow. And now I look at you two, at this family you have built, and I think you might be the best thing that ever happened to my brother." "She is," Zachary said simply, reaching over to take Georgia's hand. "She absolutely is." Georgia squeezed his hand, her heart full. "He saved my life," she said quietly, "in every way that matters." The years continued to pass in a gentle progression of seasons and milestones. Samuel grew tall and strong, taking over more of the ranch work as Zachary's hair began to gray at the temples. Emily surprised everyone by showing a talent for drawing, filling pages and pages with sketches of the ranch and the animals and her family. Jacob, true to his quiet nature, developed a love for books and learning that eventually led him to become a teacher. More children came, though the spaces between them grew longer. Another daughter, Margaret, with her grandmother's name and a fierce, independent streak. And finally, a son they named Zachary after his father, the baby of the family who was doted on by everyone. The ranch expanded until it was one of the most successful in the county. Zachary hired hands to help with the work, good men who treated Georgia with respect, and became part of the extended family that gathered around the Quinn table. Thomas's homestead prospered too, and the two families remained close, visiting regularly, helping each other through hard times and celebrating the good ones together. Georgia never forgot where she came from or what she had survived to get here. The memory of that July morning remained with her, not as a source of shame but as a reminder of her own strength, her capacity to protect herself when necessary, her refusal to be a victim. She had taken a life to save her own, and while she regretted the necessity, she did not regret her survival. She told her daughters when they were old enough to understand that they had the right to defend themselves, to say no, to fight back if someone tried to hurt them. She taught her sons to treat women with respect, to understand that strength meant protecting those who needed it, not exploiting them. And she told all her children about the cowboy who had seen a desperate woman walking into the desert and had offered to guide her home, because she wanted them to understand what real kindness looked like. On their 20th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Samuel had recently married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch, and they brought their first baby, making Georgia and Zachary grandparents for the first time. Emily had moved to Little Rock to study art, but she came home for the occasion with a portfolio full of stunning sketches. Jacob taught at the school in a town 10 miles away, but visited every weekend. Margaret was courting a young man her parents approved of, much to her relief, and little Zachary was growing into a fine young man himself at 12 years old. The house was full of laughter and love, 3 generations of family that had all started with one act of kindness on a hot July day. They ate a feast that took Georgia and her daughters-in-law days to prepare, and afterward, Zachary pulled her aside to the porch where they had spent so many evenings talking about everything and nothing. 20 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. 20 years since I married the woman I pulled back from the desert. Best decision I ever made, stopping to talk to you that day. Best decision I ever made was accepting your help, Georgia replied. I was so scared, Zachary. I thought my life was over. I thought I had no future, no hope, nothing but death waiting for me. And then you appeared and offered me a way out. I could not leave you, Zachary said simply. I looked at you and I saw someone who needed help, and I knew I had to offer it. But I had no idea that helping you would turn into this, into the best 20 years of my life. Georgia leaned into his embrace, feeling his arms come around her, solid and safe and familiar. From inside the house, she could hear her children laughing, her grandchild crying to be fed, the sounds of family and life and all the things she had never expected to have. You guided me home, she said softly. All those years ago, when you asked if you could guide me home, I did not understand that you were offering me this. A real home, a real family, a real life, but you were, even if neither of us knew it yet. I would do it again in a heartbeat, Zachary told her. Every day I would choose you. Every day, I thank God that I was riding near Bentonville that July, that I saw you, that I had the courage to stop and offer help. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Georgia Quinn." They stood together on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, while the sun set over the hills they had built their life upon. Inside, their family carried on without them for a moment, secure in the knowledge that the foundation of love Zachary and Georgia had built was strong enough to support all of them. The years continued to accumulate like treasures in a vault. Georgia and Zachary grew old together, their faces weathering into maps of a life well lived, their bodies slowing but their minds still sharp, their love still strong. They watched their children have children, watched those children grow and start families of their own, until the Quinn name was spread across Arkansas and beyond, a legacy of hard work and honest dealing and love. The ranch passed eventually to Samuel, who ran it with the same care and dedication his father had shown. But Zachary and Georgia remained in the house they had built together, now surrounded by additions and improvements that spoke to generations of family. The vegetable garden Georgia had tended for decades was now managed by her granddaughters, but she still went out on good days to pull weeds and offer advice. The horses Zachary had raised had descendants in the corrals, bloodlines he had carefully cultivated over decades. Everything bore the mark of their presence, their care, their love, on a warm summer evening in 1900, 26 years after that July day in Bentonville. Georgia and Zachary sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Their bodies were old now, both of them in their 70s, but their hands still found each other automatically, fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "You remember the day we met?" Georgia asked, though she knew he did. They had told the story so many times to their children and grandchildren that it had taken on the quality of legend in the family. "Every detail," Zachary said. "I remember seeing you walking toward the desert like you were walking to your death. I remember thinking I had to stop you, had to help somehow. I remember asking if you would let me guide you home, and not knowing if you would say yes or tell me to leave you alone. I remember being terrified," Georgia admitted. "Terrified of you, terrified of going back to town, terrified of dying in the desert, but more terrified of the rope that waited if I stayed. You gave me a third option when I thought I only had two bad choices." "And now look at us," Zachary said, gesturing to the ranch spread out before them, to the house full of family behind them, to the life they had built together. "All of this came from that one moment, that one choice to help a stranger." "Not a stranger," Georgia corrected gently. "You were never a stranger, not really. From that first moment, you felt like home. I just did not know it yet." Zachary brought her hand to his lips, kissing her weathered knuckles with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "I love you, Georgia Quinn. I have loved you every day since I met you, and I will love you every day I have left." "And I love you," Georgia replied, her voice thick with emotion despite all the years, despite how many times they had said these words to each other. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved, and you have made my life more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, holding hands and watching their world, the world they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work and love. Inside the house, their family moved and laughed, secure in the foundation that had been laid for them, unaware of how close it had all come to never existing, but Georgia and Zachary knew. They knew how fragile it all was, how easily it could have gone differently. If Zachary had ridden past without stopping that day, if Georgia had refused his help, if the sheriff had discovered her identity, if fear had won over trust, if either of them had been less brave, less open, less willing to take a chance on the impossible, but they had stopped. They had helped. They had trusted. They had been brave. And from that single moment of connection on a dusty road outside Bentonville, an entire universe had been born. Children and grandchildren, a thriving ranch, a legacy of love that would extend far beyond their own lives. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Georgia leaned her head on Zachary's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. She thought about the woman she had been that July day, broken and desperate and ready to walk into the desert and die. That woman felt like a distant memory now, a different person entirely, though Georgia knew she still carried her inside, the part of her that had survived and fought and refused to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. That woman had saved herself by pulling the trigger when her life was threatened. But the woman she had become, the wife and mother and grandmother surrounded by love and family, that woman had been created by Zachary's kindness, by his willingness to see someone in trouble and help without asking for anything in return. Both versions of her mattered. Both were necessary. The strength that had allowed her to defend herself was the same strength that had allowed her to accept help, to trust again, to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. She was proud of both women, the desperate one and the loved one, because together they made her whole. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked softly, his breath stirring her hair. "About how grateful I am," Georgia said. "About how lucky I am to have found you, to have been found by you. About how different my life could have been, and how glad I am that it turned out this way instead." "I am grateful too," Zachary said. "Every single day, I wake up grateful that I get to spend another day with you, that I get to see our family grow, that I get to live in this place we built together. You made my life mean something, Georgia. Before you, I was just a man with a ranch, working hard and going to bed tired. After you, I became someone's husband, someone's father, the patriarch of a family that will carry our name and our values into the future. You gave me that." They stayed on the porch until the night grew cool and the stars blazed overhead in their thousands. Inside, the house gradually quieted as the family settled for the night, the younger children being carried to bed by their parents, the adults finding their own rooms in the sprawling house that had grown to accommodate them all. Finally, Zachary helped Georgia to her feet, and they made their slow way inside, supporting each other as they had for 26 years, as they would for however many years remained to them. They climbed into the bed they had shared for more than 2 decades, fitting together in the way of long married couples who knew each other's bodies as well as their own. "Good night, my love," Zachary whispered into the darkness. "Good night," Georgia whispered back, and then, because it needed to be said one more time, "Thank you for guiding me home." "Thank you for letting me," Zachary replied, and she heard the smile in his voice. They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms. Two people who had started as strangers on a desperate day and had become so much more. Partners, lovers, best friends, the foundation upon which an entire family had been built. Outside, the Arkansas night wrapped around the ranch like a blanket, protecting and sheltering everything they had created. The years after 1900 brought changes to the world around them. The new century arrived with promises of progress and modernity. Automobiles and electricity beginning to transform even rural areas like theirs. But on the Quinn Ranch, life continued in much the same way it always had. Governed by the seasons, by the needs of the animals and the land, by the rhythms of family and work and love. Georgia and Zachary aged into their 80s, moving more slowly but still sharp, still engaged with the world around them. They were surrounded always by family, by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who came to them for advice and stories and the simple comfort of their presence. The tale of how they met became family legend, told and retold until everyone knew it by heart. A reminder that love could come from the most unexpected places, that kindness mattered, that offering help to a stranger could change everything. Samuel ran the ranch with skill and dedication, expanding it further and incorporating some of the new agricultural techniques that were revolutionizing farming. Emily's artwork gained recognition beyond Arkansas, and she had several successful exhibitions in larger cities, though she always came home to the ranch for important occasions. Jacob became the principal of his school, shaping young minds with the same patient wisdom his mother had shown. Margaret married her young man and started a ranch of her own nearby, staying close to the family she loved. And young Zachary, no longer young at nearly 40, carried his father's name and his mother's strength into the new century, a bridge between the old ways and the new. On a clear morning in 1905, 31 years after their first meeting, Zachary woke to find Georgia still sleeping beside him. He watched her breathe for a moment, her face peaceful in sleep, and thought about how beautiful she still was to him, how every line and wrinkle told a story he knew by heart. He thought about the life they had built, about everything they had survived and created and loved together. He reached out to touch her shoulder gently, to wake her for breakfast as he had done thousands of times before. But something in the stillness of her body, in the absolute peace of her expression, told him that she would not wake this time. Georgia Quinn had passed in her sleep, peacefully and without pain, leaving the world as gently as she had lived in it once Zachary had brought her home. Zachary held her for a long time, tears streaming down his weathered face, his heart breaking and full at the same time. She had been the love of his life, his partner in everything, the reason his existence had meaning. But he could not regret how she had gone, could not wish for anything different than this peaceful passing after a long life full of love and family and joy. He gathered his family and told them, watched them weep and hold each other, and felt grateful that they had all known her, had all been shaped by her love and her strength. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone that read, Georgia Quinn, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She walked toward the desert and found home instead. Zachary visited her grave every day, sitting beside the stone and talking to her about the ranch, about the family, about his memories of their life together. He missed her with an ache that never quite faded, but he was not bitter. They had been given 31 years together, 31 years longer than it had seemed possible on that July day in 1874. 31 years of love and partnership and building something beautiful. It was more than many people ever got, and he was grateful for every single day. He lived another 3 years after George's death, years spent watching his family continue to grow and thrive, years spent preserving the legacy they had built together. And when his own time came in the spring of 1908, when his heart finally gave out after 82 years of steady beating, his last thought was of Georgia, of the moment he first saw her walking toward the desert, of asking if she would let him guide her home. She had said yes, and that single word had changed everything. They buried him beside her on the hill, his stone reading, Zachary Quinn, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. He saw someone in need and offered to guide her home. The ranch continued under Samuel's stewardship and eventually passed to his own children, and then to theirs. The Quinn name spread and prospered, and every generation learned the story of how it all began, with a desperate woman, a kind cowboy, and a question that changed 2 lives forever. The story became more than just family history. It became a reminder that small acts of kindness can have profound consequences, that offering help to someone in need is never wasted, that love can bloom in the most unexpected circumstances. It became a touchstone for the family values that defined the Quinns: compassion, courage, loyalty, and the understanding that everyone deserves a second chance, a way home, a refuge from whatever storms they face. And though the world changed around them, though Arkansas and the nation transformed beyond recognition from those Wild West days, the essential truth of Zachary and George's story remained constant. That two people who should have been strangers, who met in the worst possible circumstances, had recognized something in each other worth saving, worth building on, worth dedicating their lives to. Their great-great-grandchildren still visited the graves on the hill, still brought flowers and told their children about the woman who tried to walk into the desert alone, and the cowboy who asked if he could guide her home. The story never got old, never lost its power to move and inspire, because at its heart was something eternal: the transformative power of love, the importance of compassion, and the truth that home is not a place but a person, a feeling, a choice to stay even when leaving seems easier. Georgia had chosen to stay, had chosen to trust, had chosen to love. And Zachary had chosen to stop, had chosen to help, had chosen to love in return. Those choices had echoed down through generations, creating ripples that extended far beyond what either of them could have imagined on that hot July day in 1874. The ranch still stood, more than a century later, bearing the Quinn name and carrying the legacy of the two people who had built it from nothing. The house had been expanded and modernized, but parts of the original structure remained, preserved by descendants who understood the importance of remembering where they came from. The hill where Zachary and Georgia were buried became a place of pilgrimage for family members, a place to reflect and remember and reconnect with the story that had started it all. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the light turned golden and the breeze whispered through the grass, visitors to the grave swore they could feel something there, something warm and peaceful and profoundly loving. They said it felt like coming home, like being welcomed back to a place you had always belonged even if you had never been there before. Perhaps it was just imagination, the power of story and sentiment creating feelings that were not really there. Or perhaps it was something more: the love that Zachary and Georgia had shared still present somehow, still blessing the land they had cherished and the family they had created. Either way, the feeling was real to those who experienced it, a reminder that love never truly dies, that the bonds we create in life can transcend even death. The story of Georgia Ashford and Zachary Quinn ended as all stories must, with death and the passing of time. But it also never ended, living on in the family they created, in the land they cultivated, in the values they instilled, in the simple truth that kindness matters and love is worth the risk. Their story became immortal not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real. Two imperfect people who found each other in crisis and chose to build something beautiful from that broken beginning. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever comes after this life, Georgia and Zachary were together still, walking hand in hand through fields of light, finally and fully home in a way that transcended any earthly understanding of the word. She had tried to walk into the desert alone, ready to die rather than face what she thought awaited her. He had asked if he could guide her home, offering help without knowing where it would lead. She had said yes. He had kept his word. And from that simple exchange had flowed more love, more joy, more life than either of them could have dreamed possible on that desperate day when everything changed. That was the miracle and the lesson of their story, that saying yes to help, yes to hope, yes to the possibility of something better could transform everything. That home was not something you found but something you built, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one act of love at a time. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the trials they had faced or the obstacles they had overcome, but the life they had created together, the love they had shared, and the legacy of hope they had left behind for all the generations that would follow. Georgia had survived to build a beautiful life. Zachary had found his purpose in helping her do so. And together, they had proven that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest futures if you had the courage to accept help, offer love, and trust that home was not behind you but ahead of you, waiting to be built with the right person by your side.